acknowledge the of the land of the various places where we have all gathered today, and pay our respect to their elders past and present, and to their emerging leaders. So I'm speaking to you from the country of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples, and I think it's interesting to note that the Yagara language gave us the word yaka, as in hard yaka, to mean strenuous work, which is as good of a summary of the past year as any other word that I can think of. For us at PEAL SIG, it has been a time of phenomenal growth in membership numbers, which is obviously indicative of the changing landscape in our industry, but also of increased opportunities for teachers from ELICOS to branch out into other areas of learning and teaching in higher education. Our webinars this year have been a reflection of that expanding horizon in the language teaching world. Earlier in the year, we explored the transition of both teachers and students into the university learning space. And our most recent webinar was a curation of some of the archetypical programs that deliver PEAL services in tertiary education. Our final webinar will be focusing on methods and approaches for evaluating these service delivery programs. And particularly, we are looking to address this question: why evaluate? In their very informative paper entitled Evaluation of Academic Language and Learning Development Provision, Hamilton et al. Emphasized the increasing importance of curating evidence to evaluate the impact of a program that will, quote, support practitioners and managers to make judgments about their programs, to improve their effectiveness, and to inform future decisions, unquote. For those of us who come from an ESL and ELICOS background, program evaluation is not generally part of our training or professional experience. And I think this is somewhat reflected in the literature, where a large portion of studies seem to rely heavily on attendance numbers and Likert surveys. And I want to be very careful here to stress that those measures can provide invaluable insights into student satisfaction and student engagement, but these are not the only metrics that can or should be considered. I remember myself 10 years ago presenting at a management meeting at Griffith on very strong student participation rates and satisfaction results for our English Help program. And the director at the time remarking, of course they love free consultations. So what? Is it working? Actually, she used slightly more colorful language than that. But it would perhaps be easy to characterize her comment as stemming from a lack of awareness about the importance of motivation in the learning process, or that of student initiative in accessing student support services. But she was by no means uninformed in this regard. Rather, she was more likely focused on the not insignificant amount of money that had been invested in the program and the increasingly aggressive regulatory environment that existed at the time. If the English Help program was working or not was a crucial data point that would inform high-stakes strategic choices at a university-wide level. So this little anecdote tells us two very important things about evaluating PEAL's programs. Firstly, different stakeholders have different expectations and will define success in different ways. When conducting any program evaluation, you have to consider your audience, their motivations, their reporting lines, as well as both the institutional and external context. Secondly, and consequently, when evaluating your programs, it is important to collect and consider a variety of different metrics, particularly since the majority of PEAL programs are not income generating. Success and impact may be defined in a wide manner of ways, such as visible learning outcomes, improved student retention, or your accountability as a faithful custodian of the budget. This can be more complicated to demonstrate, but raw attendance numbers and feel-good student feedback alone will probably not be strong enough to make your case. Today, our four speakers are the conveners of the PEAL SIG, and we'll be presenting some very honest case studies from our own experiences working in this space. Two of these studies are still very much in flux, and so are demonstrative of the fact that this process is a journey, and sometimes a messy one. Firstly, Catherine Olstone will look at how the team at the University of Sydney Seton Learning Hub is working through the initial and exploratory stages of developing a strategic and cohesive approach to evaluating their programs. Then Marta Skirvis will outline the steps taken in designing evaluation tools for conversational English language programs at Monash University, taking into consideration the institutional context and the purpose of the evaluation report. I will be speaking about the English Help Program, a student academic language and learning consultation service at Griffith University, and be focusing on how we use different data sets to inform operational direction. Finally, Pamela Humphreys will use a published journal article that focuses on the evaluation of a PEAL mechanism to show some metrics that can be used and ways in which such evaluation can be shared with the broader academic community. As each of these case studies is being presented, I think it would be useful to consider three focus questions. Firstly, what is being measured and why? Then, how is success and impact defined? And finally, how is the narrative of the results crafted? We'll have some time for your own questions after all four case studies have been presented, but please feel free to post your questions in the chat as they occur to you. So Kat, I believe it is over to you.
Thanks, John, and what a beautiful introduction. So can everyone see my screen? Yep, great. Okay, so let's get started. So today I'll present a case study focused on, as John said, the University of Sydney Centre for English Teaching and Learning Hub and how we're approaching evaluation of our programs. Noting that we're in the very initial and exploratory stages of developing our approach. And as such, what I'll talk about today is all the factors and considerations that we're working through in the process of coming up with a strategic, cohesive, effective and logical approach to evaluation that meets the needs of the unit, key stakeholders and the university. First, I'll give you some background and context, then I'll cover the problem or problems that we're addressing, how we're tackling the problem, and our proposed approach along with next steps. So firstly, to give you some background and context to our situation, in order to highlight the environment in which we're operating and which has heavily influenced or is influencing our approach to evaluation. So there's been a number of significant changes, to put it lightly, over the past 12 months that have really changed the environment we're operating in. And therefore, it's changed the expectations of the unit and the reporting requirements as well. So firstly, between 2020 and 2021, we underwent a big change plan that brought together what had previously been three separate units. And this was CET, post-entry, CET and post-entry academic language and learning support and post-entry mathematics support. And these were brought together through the change plan into CET and the Learning Hub as we're now known. The purpose of the change plan was to facilitate or deliver high quality, innovative academic development programs and resources to facilitate opportunities for student success through a proactive, timely, scalable, sustainable, evidence-based approach that caters to the wide diversity of student needs. So this was the aims of the change plan. On top of this, the unit was then sort of located in the newly formed structure of the student life cluster within the DBC education portfolio. And this, of course, is a central service unit of the university and is responsible for university-wide initiatives. And the most significant strategic piece of work is the implementation of the new student language and communication strategy. You might be wondering what this all has to do with evaluation, but of course, these contextual factors are key influences over how we approach the evaluation of our programs. As a result of this changed context, we see then an increased reporting expectation in order to demonstrate that we're meeting the aims of the change plan, that we're meeting the aims of the student life cluster and DVC education, that we're providing value to the university in terms of value for the funds that they're investing in the central unit, and also, of course, student outcomes. And demonstrating too that we're meeting the expectations of the student language and communication strategy. with the change too becomes a wider audience for our reporting. So it's CET and Learning Hub staff, of course, it's the university executive committees, multiple committees actually, faculty, staff and academics, and also the Student Language and Communication Strategy Advisory Group. Of course, that's not all of the audiences there, but you can see that they're quite wide now and wider because of the changes. And then all this is necessitating us to develop this strategic, cohesive, effective and logical approach to evaluation and reporting, and being able to demonstrate that we're doing this. So the problem at the moment, and I just want to highlight again, I love the way that John used the word messy, because it is very, very messy. And it seems to be that evaluation is really about trying to pin down some kind of order in what can be chaos at different points. So the problems that we're facing, or the challenges that we're dealing with, are that in bringing together the 3 units, we have 3 different databases. And of course, with 3 different databases come structural issues in the databases, which means things like certain information can be extracted, but some information can't be extracted from databases. For example, we can get cohort information out at the event level or the sort of workshop session level, but we can't drill down into one student's engagement over time in order to see patterns in student engagement and the relationship between events, for example. We have so this is currently, we're working on it obviously, but we're in the process of working on it. We have no standardized and consistent approach to measuring what we do. For example, we have different ways of counting attendance across every unit. So do you count attendances or do you count individual students? So therefore, if one student attends 25 times, do you count them as 1 or do you count them as 25? It sounds simple, but actually when you start to dig down, these are real issues that you need to address. There's no standard set of questions on surveys, which means we're evaluating different things on different programs and in the different units. There's also a difference in timing. Are we evaluating at the end of one workshop, a series of workshops, etc.? And then also just added on to this, the changing landscape, for example, going from face-to-face sessions to online sessions, changing the format of things because of, in response to COVID or in response to just changing needs, it means that nothing stays the same. So at the moment, it's been very difficult to get longitudinal data on changes over time, improvements over time, or otherwise. There's also difficulty in obtaining a holistic picture via the feedback and evaluation mechanisms, in the sense that students who attend and are engaged are more likely to respond. On a recent program, we wanted to find out why students didn't attend. But of course, it's very hard to get students who didn't engage to give feedback on why they didn't attend. So that's the sort of thing we're trying to work on as well. There's also currently a lack of a unified and strategic conceptualization within the unit of what we should be measuring and reporting on and how to measure it effectively. And of course, that's what we're working on at the moment. So in terms of tackling the problem and just revisiting what we're trying to do to get a cohesive, effective, logical approach to how we do these things, we've first obviously responding to the needs of the change plan, and the change plan's aims were really to focus on an evidence-based approach and increased reach and impact. So they're key things that we need to be able to demonstrate. Also, out of the Student Language and Communication Strategy, we have an initiative to identify and develop appropriate evaluation mechanisms. So these kinds of things are driving what we do. So as a first step, we've had to define what we want to evaluate and report on. and define these terms of reach and impact, which are often bandied around without much sort of delving into what that actually means. And in the report that John quoted before, they quote a lot of different measures of success across the academic language and learning service providers, including student achievement, grades and retention, number of students who use the service, student satisfaction, strategic goals and performance of the institution, engagement or collaboration with staff and academics from other departments. So there's a wide variety of ways of defining impact. For us, we're at the stage now where we've looked at impact or elements of reach and impact as being reach, the attendance numbers, return rate, and unique students. Number of unique students and also details, but I'll go into that in a minute. And then impact, looking at attendance, return rate, sense of belonging, which will be interesting to try to measure. And then also university pathway students' performance. So in terms of where we're at the moment, our proposed approach has been to identify these 5 ways to measure impact and reach. And I'll just talk through these very quickly and then I'm nearly finished. I'm just conscious of time as well. So we've identified the need to look at overall attendance in line with this current student life reporting structure. This is something that is valued, I guess. And continue measuring the number of attendances across all initiatives. So how many bums on seats, basically. Then we also want to look at the number of unique students, but then also identify and track their patterns of attending the support initiatives. This would help us establish the diversity of the cohort in order to be able to demonstrate that we've increased reach to different cohorts of students, actually. And then look at, it would also help us identify success through measurements like, are students who are in progression taken off progression after attending a certain number of support workshops or a certain program, etc. So looking at their characteristics in that way. Then also looking at return rate. Are students likely to attend more than one support session or initiative? And we'd like to flesh this out further to see if the return rate is positive, i.e. they feel like they're benefiting from the support, or potentially negative, that they become codependent on support initiatives, perhaps. So just thinking about that. We also seek to measure the sense of belonging to USID via the introduction of an extra question in the evaluation questionnaires across the support initiatives, and then also compare these results to other surveys conducted by the university, such as the Student Life Survey, to see if students who participate in support initiatives feel a stronger connection to the university than others. I think that's an interesting one though, because I mean, how do you measure something like a sense of belonging, really? But anyway, that's a question for perhaps another presenter or another day. And then finally, also to measure university pathways. Students compare their WAM scores year on year of different university pathways. So did they enter via IELTS, TOEFL, CET, USFP, so, which is the foundation program, and have a look at the split by students who did and who did not attend support initiatives, and if that had an effect on their WAM. I know that that raises a lot of questions about how you'd actually effectively evaluate the impact, but again, that's perhaps a question for question time or another day. And then finally, next step. So you can see absolutely we're in the exploratory stages. There's a lot more to think about, and just highlighting we might need to look at other measures of impact and success. What form will the data take? Will it be qualitative or quantitative? What tools are most appropriate to collect the data? what's our frequency of reporting, additional audiences perhaps, and then also the format of reporting. And just highlighting that even though we want to create a consistent and unit-wide approach, also acknowledging that some of these mechanisms will need to be specific to the area of the unit and then also program. So we need a cohesive approach, which is also appropriate to evaluating differences in the program and acknowledges that. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll stop there and I will hand over to Marta now.
Thank you, Kat. And let's see if I can share. Is it sharing? Wonderful, thank you. So colleagues, my name is Marta Skirbis. I'm Director of Pathways at ACU, so Australian Catholic University. And today in this session, I will we'll talk about the evaluation of a program from Monash University, where I used to work from 2015 to 2019. And the program was called Let's Chat program. I will talk through how we planned the evaluation of the program, what was considered, and how we made decisions on the tools that we used. And then I will highlight what was the value of evaluation and the outcomes, and also what was the value for the institutional level and the program level. And of course, nothing goes very smoothly, so there were lessons learned, and I will summarize this at the end. So Let's Chat was, let me just do that. When planning for evaluation, like Kat and John said before, it is really, really necessary to look at what picture you want to tell. So don't underestimate the importance of considering institutional and program context when thinking about the program evaluation. Understanding the reporting lines, the portfolio priorities, KPIs, funding options, they all play important role in setting up the evaluation. In the case of Let's Chat at Monash, it was important to understand that we were in the COO's portfolio. Moreover, we were in the student engagement and campus experience team, which also meant that while this was a conversational English language program, it was set up as an international student engagement program and was also funded under this umbrella funding. So we considered this context when planning what do we want to know about the program outcomes and what story we want to tell with the supporting data. So there was much to consider before we made any decisions. And an important step in setting up a robust and valuable evaluation was having clarity on what, why, and for whom we're doing the evaluation. One of the first things I did was to examine the institutional strategies and priorities. For a program to be supported by a wider university or institution, I'm always very keen that at the design stage that I start to look and link for expected outcomes of the program with the institutional priorities. And in Monash's case, at that time, there were some clear linkages. Besides student academic performance, the institutional focus at the time were international student engagement. And you have to remember that was the time of heightened media attacks on universities, seeing international students as a revenue stream. Mental health strategy, which was actually coming on the back of that media attacks, and retention and campus activation. So, if you know where Monash is situated, it is far from the city. So we needed to have a very vibrant campus, and there was quite a program of work going around that. So at that early stage of Let's Chat delivery, it was extremely important to demonstrate the contribution of that program on the institutional priorities and strategies. This did pay off later as the program received all stakeholders' buy-in and consequently also additional funding. We considered two sets of questions that informed what evaluation tools we were going to use. Firstly, the program level, we wanted to know how effective is the program, how do students engage with learning and the content, what do students think about the program delivery? Secondly, at the institutional level, we wanted to be very clear on what story will the evaluation data tell, and what forum are we going to present it? Who would be the audience, and what questions might that audience have for us? Once we were able to answer these questions and we had clarity on expected outcomes of the program, we set up an exploring literature and frameworks applicable to the program. So we needed to understand, what does literature say about peer-to-peer programs and how are they evaluated? We also examined student engagement areas and looked for similar programs and evaluations elsewhere. I was also exploring what data is already available at the university level, and what accesses or what access levels would I need to take to access that data lake. Because you need to know every university has an enormous amount of data, so not everything needs to be reinvented. We can actually tap on that richness as well. At that point in the program, we've already decided that we will go for pre and post program surveys, in addition to some other tools like attendance data and response rates. And evaluation tools that we decided on were covering both levels, a program level and institutional level. And we were able to leverage large data collections done by the University Office of Planning and Statistics. It is easy to talk about this experience now, looking back, of course. In reality, as Kat said, at that time, it was a journey, and it was often a very steep learning curve. Despite all the background work and prior background work and literature check and all the work we've done around evaluation, the process was often stopped and restarted and repivoted, and not really a smooth sailing. So it's not an easy process. Priorities do change, and when you're running a program for a number of years, you actually really do need to relook at those priorities, your own, the program, and institutions. For Let's Chat, our evaluation tools and survey questions have gone through a number of iterations. We annually reviewed survey questions and adjusted the time of administration to get better results, to have a high percentage response. The basis of ongoing review was twofold. We really needed to constantly monitor the quality of the program, including methodology, content, and delivery. And we also was often asked very challenging questions about the program in different forums that this was presented, like academic board or learning and teaching committee. Like John said, with his director, there was always a question, yes, there's lots of students, and so what? How do we know this is actually successful? So that all informed a revision of the service and the tools. We were going back and changing this constantly. Later in 2019, we were able to work with the Office of Planning and Statistics, and they pulled out data for us on the students who attended that chat. And that provided the further insights, what actually happened with the students, and we were able to look at some correlations in long term. So what did the data tell us, and what was the value of evaluating Let's Chat? We were very consistent with evaluating before and after every single semester. So we got a lot of data after 5 years. At the start, this enabled us to really work on the quality of the program and continuously improving every aspect of it. Data collected over the first 4 semesters also started to paint the picture to the university. It was telling us that the program has a significant positive impact on students' sense of belonging. So it's a very similar measure as Kat has mentioned: engagement, so student engagement, satisfaction, and linguistic confidence. It also indicated a positive correlation between students who attended Let's Chat for a year and their academic performance and retention rate. So that's a correlation. Remember how I was looking for linkages at the university priorities when I was setting up the evaluation? Well, that actually paid off, and the evaluation data very clearly linked to and aided the university priorities and strategies. It demonstrated the value of Let's Chat across a number of strategic priorities. This in turn prompted further university investment, which enabled an immense growth of the program over the 2018 and 2019. So to conclude, what have we learned in the process? Clarity on what we're trying to measure and where will this data be useful and who will the audience for data be was of the ultimate importance. We also learned that we do not need to reinvent the wheel, that there is a lot of data at university level that we could use and have access to. And finally, the important one was about the staff capabilities, understanding the staff needed to understand what evaluation is, what are we trying to do, where is this reporting going, and then they started to also be involved in analysis, interpretation, and presentations, which was really then the whole of the team approach. So my take-home advice to anyone who is setting up a new program or a project would be, think about what story you want to tell and why, and who is this story for. So if you can answer all of these, then you're already well on the way to design a very useful and purposeful evaluation. So that's all from me, and I'm handing it back to John.
Thanks, Marta.
Okay.
If you could just, there we go.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Let me just get that out of the way. So despite all the bluster in my opening, my case study is going to be somewhat hypocritical, as I'm going to talk about how we use attendance data and student feedback, to make strategic and operational decisions regarding the delivery of the English Help program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Smith, and I'm the Assistant Director of Studies for University Programs at Griffith English Language Institute at Griffith University. Essentially, I'm the Academic Operations Manager for several strands of the Griffith English Language Enhancement Strategy, or the GELIS, as it is often referred to, which is a university-wide whole-of-student lifecycle academic language and learning support provision aimed at international students who speak English as an additional language. The largest program in the strategy, in terms of sheer student numbers, is English Help, which offers free consultations, workshops, as well as a number of online self-access academic language and skills resources. But by far, our most popular service are the consultations. Students are allowed to book one 45-minute consultation per week, every week, with one of our consultants who's experienced both in academic language and learning and working with EAL students. Pre-COVID, we routinely delivered over 7,000 individual consultations per year. English Help is the oldest strand of the GELIS, having first started in 2007, delivering only about 600 consults in that first year. And so those early days of Help were very much focused on building up student numbers, which was not an easy task back then, since a lot of the technologies that we now take for granted were simply not available at the time. Students booked their consults over the phone, record keeping was mostly paper-based, and promotion of the service largely depended on flyers posted around campus and word of mouth. Nonetheless, English Help numbers grew and grew and grew. As our director mentioned earlier, free consultations, of course they love it. Student demand for the service became insatiable, and the English Help administrative staff tried their hardest to meet that demand. However, being restricted to mostly paper-based records, the coordinators at the time did not have ready access to data collection and analysis tools. And as a result, by 2012, they were regularly exceeding their budget. So around that same time, there were a number of other changes and staffing changes occurring at GELI. And the English Help program came under the purview of Pamela Humphreys, who will be speaking next, and myself, along with the explicit directive to bring the English Help program back into budget. Thankfully, there had also been, by then, a number of technological upgrades. And so we now had access to a robust online booking system, which not only made booking consultations much easier for both students and our admin team, but it also gave us the capability to collect, curate, and manipulate large amounts of informative data in a digital format. Initially, not quite knowing what to do with thousands and thousands of rows of spreadsheet, we started examining this data set to see what it could tell us about how students were accessing and utilizing the English Help Service. And slowly a pattern started to emerge. Based on a year-on-year review of the appointment data, we noted that the demand for our help consultations rose steadily throughout the term, would drop dramatically during the midterm break, and then peaked around weeks 9 and 10 of each term, when the majority of major assessment items are due. So rather than meeting student demand on a week-by-week basis, using this data, we developed an operational model for consultation allocation that was better tailored to the shape of that demand over the whole of the term. We thus held back allocating consultations earlier in the term, but then increased it during periods of expected higher demand. We were also able to be more predictive in determining how to best allocate our resources across campuses. Griffith University is actually spread across 5 or 6 campuses, depending on how you count, across throughout Southeast Queensland. And so this enabled us to not over allocate consultations at some of our smaller campuses. Most importantly, it enabled us to manage our budget prudently across the whole of the academic year. Nonetheless, we still had insatiable demand for the English Help Service, and leaving students languishing on a waiting list is just simply not good customer service. So we needed to somehow curtail that demand. A review of formal and informal student and tutor feedback, much of which was captured through surveys, made it apparent that the aim and purpose of English Help needed to be clarified and then clearly messaged to students. Students were coming to our consults as a first port of call, and often for purposes that were better supported by other services offered at the university. And this was essentially overwhelming us. So using that information, we then conducted a number of focus groups with both internal and external stakeholders, which resulted in the development of a clear mandate to ensure English Help is focused on in-degree academic language support that aim to foster independence through teaching. We further communicated this to students through various mechanisms and messaging tactics, and eventually we found that the demand finally started to plateau at a level that we were able to manage. It has been over 10 years since we first instituted this operational model and mandate, but it has proven itself robust enough to have survived a number of strategic changes and shifts over the years, not to mention a pandemic. So in summary, this case study was an examination of how 2 commonly available data sets, that of attendance data and qualitative feedback, were evaluated to determine the operational direction of a PEAL provision. I think the key takeaway from this is that all kinds of useful insights can still be garnered from even the most readily available and seemingly mundane of data sets, particularly since for many of us, good, rich data can be difficult to get our hands on. We often need to be creative in how we parse and utilize what we do have access to. You need to be prepared to think outside of the box if necessary and make the most of the data that you do have access to. Secondly, it is important to clearly define the goal or purpose of your evaluation. Not only will this focus your approach, but it will also allow for emergent themes and insights in your data to become more readily apparent. This is particularly true with qualitative data, but as was demonstrated here, can also be the case with raw quant as well. Okay, thank you. So that's all from me, short and sweet, but I'm going to pass over to Pamela now. So let me just get my.
Okay, thank you, John. Can you all see my screen now in presentation mode? Yes, awesome. Okay, well, thanks, John and Kat and Marta for that. I'm going to be picking up on a few of those things, but I'm taking a slightly different approach. Kat, excuse me, Kat and Marta mentioned, and John mentioned the messiness. And actually what I'm going to be presenting on isn't messy at all, because we've got to the point where we've actually published a journal article And the first thing I'd like to say to you is whenever you read a journal article, remember that there's lots and lots of messiness that went into that before it was mopped up and looks beautiful on the page. So I'm actually going to be presenting on this article, which some of you may have read, and I've put the link to where the article is in the bottom right-hand corner there. It was published in JEEP at the beginning of 2018. And you can see very much in the title there, it's about evaluating a PEAL mechanism. The article was about evaluating the effectiveness of a university-wide credit-bearing English language enhancement course. In fact, a suite of courses, 4 courses. Three of us co-wrote this paper. So it's myself and 2 other colleagues. And again, I would say the challenges of publishing, I would always encourage you to co-write if you can, to share the load. But I'm going to talk you through some of this paper, and particularly some of the metrics that we use to evaluate these credit-bearing courses, as they were called at Griffith, but often they're called units of study. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about publishing in general and publishing on PEAL initiatives. For any of you who work in academia or have had some contact with academia, you will know that publishing is absolutely critical in the academic world. It's good to get your work out there and get your research findings out there. And in fact, it's seen as a way of adding legitimacy and face validity to your work. Many academics have what's called a 40-40-20 workload, where they spend 40% of their time on teaching, 40% on research, and 20% on service. So there's 40% very often in an academic's workload that is supposed to be related to research and publications. And different universities define being research active in different ways. But I've worked at places where academics have to publish at least 2 articles or chapter in a highly ranked journal per year. So publishing is really critical. Academics often use the term publish or perish. But having said that, it is very important in the academic world, but it can be very challenging, and particularly for those of us, and I put myself in that group, who do not have 40% of their time to do research and to publish. I don't have any research allocation in my workload. And not only that, but publishing is really hard work. And what I'm going to show you, as I said, it doesn't look messy at all. It looks very mopped up and very pretty, but it was written by 3 of us. It took a considerable length of time, and we were also incredibly fortunate that we had central areas of the university who did some of the data collection and analysis for us. So the final product does look like it was simple, but as Marta said earlier on, what did you say? It was very, very challenging times. It's very easy to talk, you said, Marta, but it's not as easy as it might look when you see a finished product. So in terms of the timeline, the data that I'm going to be showing you today was actually collected over a 5-year period between 2011 and 2016. The paper was written in 2016. It was sent for review in 2017 and was published 10 months later after several iterations of revisions in 2018. So one thing I would say to you is don't underestimate the time it takes to write such things and to publish, but also don't underestimate the impact that it can have. Over the last few years, since the publication of this journal article, I've been able to use it in a range of ways. I've been able to present on it, such as today. I've been able to put it on my CV, and it's a way of really legitimizing the work that you do. And qual and quant evidence is highly valued in the academic arena. So just going back to the first page of the article, I mentioned to you how long it took, and here's a little bit of the article history here, which belies those 6 years that preceded it to write it and to actually submit it in the first place. So the paper itself evaluates a suite of credit-bearing academic language and learning units of study. We developed 4. They all had the same unit learning outcomes and very similar assessment tasks, but they were discipline specific at the macro level of business, health, arts, and STEM. And these courses were mandatory for all undergraduate international students who had entered the university with less than a 6.5 or less. And they're called ELEC. You're going to see the word ELEC, English Language Enhancement Course, throughout the article. So my colleagues have mentioned a couple of times today the importance of defining the metrics. What is it that you want to measure? It's absolutely critical to define what you want to measure. So I've just brought up the abstract here. And in this article, we had 6 metrics. So this paper outlines 6 mechanisms that can be utilized in the evaluation of such mechanisms. So the 6 were, they're listed here: English language proficiency, academic outcomes, academic integrity reporting, retention, student feedback on formal surveys and evaluations, and student self-directed learning. So they're mentioned there. Of course, we're going to have to define each of those and how we're going to operationalize it. So I'm not going to go through all 6. I'm just going to choose one of them, and I'm going to choose academic outcomes. So this is an extract where in the defining section of the paper, we explain what each of those 6 metrics mean. So if I just unpack this section a little bit for you, academic outcomes, we decided that we would use GPA, grade point average, as the proxy to operationalize the construct of academic success or academic outcomes. In some universities now, they've moved to a WAM, a weighted average mark, but same idea. So in this first paragraph, I explain the metric and I explain the proxy that we used to measure it. And we were able to compare students who had taken this course with students who had not taken the course to measure their GPA and their WAM. And we use that to represent academic success. And in the paper, we go on to define each of the 6 metrics in that way. So for example, English language proficiency was measured by using an IELTS test, pre and post first semester. Academic integrity reporting was measured as a percentage of the number of academic integrity reports in the university as a whole before and after the intervention. And we saw a massive drop. Retention and attrition, again, this was both academic integrity reporting and retention was data that was collected centrally. Student evaluations, which is standard practice in universities, that was available to all of the academics, but again, was analyzed centrally for us. And self-directed learning was an assessment task that was built into this unit of study, where students had to reflect on their use of a particular service. So there were 6 different metrics. We defined them all. We explained how we were going to operationalize them. In the next section of the paper is the findings. And I'm not going to go through all of the findings. I'd encourage you to go and read the paper. But one thing I would say as a consumer of research, if not a writer of research, as a consumer, you can choose to skip over the findings, and lots of people do. If you're in a hurry, you can certainly top and tail articles, just looking at the intro and but skipping over the findings and just going straight to the discussion, and that's fine. But really the findings are the meat. And there's lots of stats and data in this section that I would encourage you to go and have a look at. But the findings in the paper do suggest impact. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we claim impact, and I'm going to say that you need to be very aware of not overclaiming causality. So it's very challenging to measure the impact of post-entry academic language and learning. And I'll just show you how we make our claim. This was in the introductory part. What we've said is the evidence does not point to categorical shifts in language proficiency, socio-cultural integration, or learner autonomy as a result of the LX. What it does is gives pause to speculate on the correlational rather than causal relationship between the program and the data. So the key words there are speculate on the correlational rather than causal relationship. So be very careful about overclaiming that what you put in place, that intervention caused the impact, because you may not be able to claim that categorically. Similarly, in the conclusion, we make similar comments about not claiming causality. I'll just show you where we did that. We said this paper provides substantive evidence to show the co-occurrence of a number of positive educational outcomes, okay? The co-occurrence of, we don't use the word, we don't claim causality. And again, in the last paragraph, we say that effectiveness is challenging to evaluate and that moderate measurable gains are likely as a result of such an intervention, okay? Moderate gains are likely. So, just in summary, I would encourage you to publish if you can, even though it is challenging and it does take a long time, but it really does have an impact, particularly in the academic sphere. If you're going to do so, you need to identify and then define those metrics and decide how you're going to operationalize them. You're going to have to provide your findings, which may include some statistical analysis, depending on the metrics that you've chosen and how you've chosen to operationalize them. And just to reiterate, beware overclaiming causality. It may be correlational, but it may not be more than that. Okay, I'm going to stop there. And I think it's time to hand back to John, who's going to manage some of your questions.
Thank you, Pamela, and also to Marta and Kat. Thank you all. I hope everybody found that informative and worthwhile. There were some really interesting points that came through. I think a lot of commonalities that I think we can pick up on. I think the fact that it's a messy journey was something that was mentioned quite regularly. I think something else that kind of came through clearly was in terms of data, you can't always get what you want. That there is a lot of things that you would like to measure, but you just are unable to access or get your hands on that type of data. And the last thing I wanted to really pick up on was what Pamela talked about there is not over claiming on causality. I think it's a very tricky tightrope to walk. I noticed that in many studies, I think a lot of researchers avoid that can of worms entirely and instead measure things like engagement. Seems to be a common way of sidestepping that particular Gordian's knot. But I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand virtually and turn on your microphone. Or if you're shy, you feel free to type it in the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy from Edith Cowan, and we're sort of we've just got Salesforce in to start measuring our uptake of language support. And we have such a wide range, studiosity, consultations and everything. How did you get by because we collect the data kind of anyway, how did you get your ethics approval to publish in this? Because sometimes, because you can't get permission from the students, and we have all this great data, but as soon as we get to ethics, it's like, well, you can't do it because you've already collected it. Any ideas?
So I'll answer that. So we had 6 different metrics. We did get ethics for, I remember explicitly getting ethics for the English language proficiency one, which was around the IELTS test. What else? Academic outcomes. I seem to recall that we had this discussion with the central areas of the university who had indicated that students had given their consent to this data being used for research purposes, providing that it was de-identified. So I guess you'd need to look at how you've collected the data. And in fact, I've just spent about a year at Macquarie sitting on a panel reviewing our policy for collecting doing student surveys. And we've decided that we are going to put a little tick box at the beginning of every student survey, which gives consent, or they can opt out, that this data can automatically be used for research purposes, for educational research purposes. without, they can opt out if they want to, but without us having to go back and request it again. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It can be a problem and very frustrating. You've got all this fantastic data and you're not allowed to use it from an ethics perspective.
Yeah, I think that we were able to like report on it within the institution, but as soon as we said we were going to present it or publish it, that became problematic. And I know that Catherine's just said we can use, retrospective ethics, and we have occasionally been able to get out of scope for it. But yeah, I think that's a great idea to have the tick. I automatically give you permission is the key.
Yeah, you're absolutely right though, Tracy. I should have mentioned that you do need to get ethics if you're going to publish on it.
Yeah. We did have consent forms that we used to do in the ELEC course for the reflection task. Yeah,
that's right. So certain aspects of those 6 would have been done individually. Some of it was institutional, but you are absolutely right that is a key consideration.
No, it's great. And it's so good to actually see something published in that area, because, we have to justify our mere existence really. And, they're not replacing us when we leave in the learning support area. And I'm always being asked, well, how many students go? Because I run the Pella program here. How many students go to it? It's like, well, how long's a piece of string really? Not
thousands is what you said. Thousands.
Sorry?
Thousands is your answer to that question.
We have thousands, yes.
Tracy, I'll just add, we've just started this year. No, that's not right. We started in the middle last year another a big program here at ACU, and we've immediately said we probably will want to publish on that. So we've embedded a lot of we started with ethics then, and we were very, very clear what we wanted to achieve, and we've actually embedded all of the consent forms and so on with students and what data we're collecting at the very beginning. And we're probably 5 years down the track before we publish, but it's a good thing to have, so we don't need to go back.
Yep. That's the plan now. With our latest surveys is to have at the very top, by completing this form, you give, permission to do that. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed your presentations, everyone.
Thank you, Tracy. Perfect question. I think we've got time for one more, if anybody's got a quick one. No? Okay. Well, I guess that finishes us off for the year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I can't believe it's already gotten to that point that we're saying those sorts of things to each other. But here is to a better 2022. It's looking brighter. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody again next year. I'm sure we'll send around a survey asking for suggestions of topics and possible areas that we can move into for the next year. But until then, all the best. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'd just like to jump in at this stage and just thank the PEAL SIG conveners, so Pat, Pamela, John, Kat, and Marta for their work convening the SIG this year. They've done an amazing job of bringing together the post-entry community this year, and it was a really important moment for us all to come together, and also presenting a number of relevant and useful sessions. So thank you so much. We've really appreciated your work this year.
Likewise, Sophie, we've very much appreciated your support of the PEAL SIG as well.
Most definitely.
Thank you to
Sophie.
everyone for coming along and participating as well.
Thank you, everybody. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you next year.
All the best.
Bye.